Welcome to Seneschal 101. As I said, we are recording. Our goal is to post this to the EK YouTube channel for later reference for folks who couldn't make it. And this is, of course, primarily about being a Seneschal in the East Kingdom. Interkingdom anthropology being what it is, there are some differences, I am sure. While, of course, most of the basics are the same, but always, of course, check your own kingdom if you're watching from outside of the East. I will stop from time to time and ask if there are questions, but I'm not going to be able to keep up with the chat. So if you could sort of hold questions, take some notes, and then when I pause and ask, then put them in the chat. So I'm not trying to scroll through the chat the whole time. Hi, if you don't know me, I'm Maeve. I'm the East Kingdom Seneschal. I've been in this position almost 2 years now and have signed up for a 3rd year. I'll take a moment to introduce our regional deputies. Elsbeth is our Southern Region deputy. Say hi, Elsbeth.
Hi, Elspeth.
Hi, Elsbeth. That was Cedric Coffee Hat, who is our Northern Region deputy.
I apologize. I had problems unmuting. Technical difficulty, not enough coffee.
That's all right. That's all right. We have 2 additional regional deputies. Tasha is our Central Region and Godefroy is our Tiamara deputy. And so they sort of help me run the major elements of the kingdom, help me funnel information out and sort of act as a layer of first response for branch seneschals. We have some other topic deputies here. I see Edith, who is our clerk of laws. Hi, Edith. I'm not seeing any other names. Audrey is sort of deputy at large for many seneschal things. So welcome, everybody. So the first thing are the basics, right? What is the seneschal structure? There's the board of directors, the society seneschal, kingdom seneschal, regional deputies, branch seneschals, right? And so the seneschal is the primary coordinating officer at each of those levels. So at the branch level, that means that to run your branch well, you need to know what your other officers are doing. In the East, we often operate kind of in silos by branch, right? So the seneschal talks to the seneschals and Minister of Arts and Sciences talks to the MOASs and so on. But branches run best when the seneschal has a sense of how the other officers are doing. So I really want to encourage as much as possible checking in with your other officers, knowing how they're doing and not micromanaging at all, but having a sense that things are going well and not just like, yep, okay, right? Have some conversations because it is the seneschal's job as running the branch. And the more you can do that by having ongoing conversations, the better your branch runs. All right, and if I'm looking sort of back and forth between screens and my notes, and I apologize for the dark behind me. I've got strong sunshine to my left, and it's making Zoom do weird things with the lighting. So what are the requirements for being a branch seneschal? These come from EK law and from the Seneschal handbook. The very basics to be a seneschal. You've got to be 18 years or older, and that's because the seneschal signs contracts. So you've got to be legal age. You've got to be a paid member of the society and maintain that paid membership for the duration of your term as seneschal. You need to live in the branch that you're a seneschal of, or if you are not a resident of that branch, you need explicit written permission from the kingdom seneschal to be seneschal of that branch from outside. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes folks live, a zip code over from their branch's official boundaries or whatever other reason they play mostly with a branch that's not where they live. Your branch needs to have procedures on file for how to select and remove non-resident officers, just so that there are some established policies. But in general, it's a fine thing. It happens I don't want to say all of the time, but it happens pretty often. There are some restrictions about being branch seneschal. You cannot simultaneously hold other positions of major responsibility: kingdom greater officer, territorial coronet, crown, right? You can have other positions in the seneschalate, including other deputies. You can hold other positions within your branch in keeping with local custom, except exchequer. Seneschal and exchequer cannot overlap. Can't state that strongly enough. We have a situation right now with a branch whose exchequer needs to step back because of some urgent life, and the seneschal wants to take over the exchequer responsibilities, and they can't, right? And so we're trying to hold a bubble open for them to find someone to take the exchequer duties, which leads me to an important responsibility of being a branch seneschal. Make sure every required office has an emergency deputy. That person has to be able and willing to step in, even if for a couple of weeks, until a permanent replacement can be found. It's not that they have to be ready to take the job for the next 2 years, right? But especially for seneschal and exchequer, you always have to have a hand at that wheel. I see your hand up, Cedric, please jump in.
Yeah, the one thing I just wanted to point out, and here's a potential point of interkingdom anthropology. I have not spent enough time in EK Kapora or EK law to speak specifically for this, but I know that in Drachenwald and in Antir, so I believe it is across the board, exchequer and seneschal cannot live in the same household.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
husband and
Also
wife cannot.
And that is basically for safety of reporting, so that, say, people who are married or otherwise in a relationship together don't have all of the control of a branch because one of them is seneschal and one of them is exchequer, right? That's just a healthy group dynamic situation, and it's part of corpora, actually, so it's not even an Eastern or any other particular kingdom thing. Thanks for that, Cedric. So those are the basics of what it is to be seneschal, like the basic requirements. Are there any questions about that so far? All right. So what are the characteristics? Like, what kind of a person makes for a good branch seneschal? This is my perspective. I think it's, happy to hear from other people if they have seneschal experience, what will help make for a good seneschal, but this is my take on the job. You need to be organized. You need to have good attention to detail. You need to communicate well, and we'll talk separately about communication a little bit later. You need to be diplomatic, right? Sometimes doing the job requires a measure of careful phrasing on how to make the message clear to your populace. You also need to be willing to say no to your friends, right? Sometimes people ask and the answer is no. You need to be creative, because more often there's a way to do what you want to do, but you need to think about how to achieve that within the rules that we have, right? So instead of just saying, oh, well, it says this, I guess that's that, think a little bit more creatively, think a little bit sideways. And this is not to say wink, nudge around the rules, not saying that. But a lot of times more solutions will present themselves if you talk it out and see what can be done. And I would say you need to be extroverted, excuse me, extroverted enough to know your people, right? You don't have to be the world's biggest extrovert, always talking, know everybody all the time, but you've got to know more than just your friends, right? You've got to have a sense of who the people in your group are and how your group functions, right? And that's a bigger challenge with the larger branches, but having a pretty good sense of your group's overall profile, I would say, is an important quality. Anybody else want to chime in with experience about what makes for a good seneschal? Elspeth, please.
You sort of touched on it, but based on some of my experiences, at least at the regional level, but it applies at the local level, you need to be okay with not being liked by everyone. You have to be able to have someone, and this happens, stand in your face and say, I don't like you. That's okay. You still have a job to do. And that's where the diplomacy really comes in handy. And you actually have to be able to handle conflict. If you're a person who does not like conflict or is uncomfortable handling it, this is the wrong job. It's more than just being able to say no to your friends. Sometimes you have to be the voice of kingdom or society rules and laws on an idea that everyone else thinks is great, but no, you can't. And particularly when people get passionate, I'm sure most of us has run into this, when people are passionate about an idea, get carried away, being able to put the brakes on and get everyone refocused. And that at that point, a lot of emotion is in play. So being calm and realizing playing the bad guy is really part of the job. Not the job. No one likes it, but it's the reality, and that is your job.
Thanks, Elspeth. Edith, and then Audrey.
Time management. You don't have to start with a full suite of project manager skills, but you've got to have the capacity to pick it up as you go, because the seneschal is the one who is responsible for making sure that everybody else is hitting their deadlines.
Yeah, and I would add, as part of time management, knowing where and when you're going to be, have the time to do the job. Maybe you've got a 9-to-5 job where you are not online, but in the evenings around 8 p.m. daily or every other day is when you're checking email. That's fine. Communicate that with your branch, right? You do not have to be on 24/7, but you do have to have some kind of established, reasonably stable schedule for when you're going to do the seneschal part of the job. Audrey.
You sort of touched on it briefly, but the ability to delegate. Yes. And trust the people that you are delegating to. You don't have to do it all. If you need to collect paperwork for whatever reason, you can make a deputy for that. You don't have to do it all. And don't micromanage those deputies.
Do not micromanage. I have it on good authority that deputies hate that. Cedric.
All of what has been brought up so far, I 100% support. The other piece, the other aspect is it really is a political job, as in this sounds worse than it is intended to be, but it is a statement of fact. You are manipulating the people around you to achieve the goals of the SCA as an organization. And one of the key attributes of a good seneschal is somebody who is able to get the people around them willing and interested and eager to do the things that you want them to do. And sometimes that takes planting a seed 6 months ahead of time and just occasionally watering it. And sometimes it takes walking up to somebody and punching them dead square in the nose. Both of those are completely valid. Extreme example, total hyperbole, but those are both ways of achieving that goal, and knowing when and where to do which is really useful if you're able to grow that in yourself. And you will make mistakes, and you will learn when and where to do it right, and you will have the attempts of doing it wrong slammed dead square into your face, and that just sucks, but learn and grow.
Yeah. Esperanza.
But you can be successful if you are an introverted person generally.
Yes, that would be where I would say knowing thyself and knowing how to make whatever your personality is work with the job, right? One doesn't have to be the host with the most, always on, to be a successful seneschal. But you've got to be someone, if you're of an introverted personality type, maybe you're great with email and other kinds of communication like that. And so you still do the job well, right? But you need to know that about yourself, right? And that's the thing that's essential in terms of being a good seneschal, is sort of knowing who you are in the world and leveraging that to be an effective branch manager. Con?
I would add that one other thing a seneschal should have is at least a rudimentary understanding of group dynamics.
Yeah.
In leadership school, we went into that a bit, and we were taught that in any given group, 80% of the people will basically do what they're supposed to do. They'll follow the rules, they'll go along. 20% are going to be problems. Roughly half of your problem people are going to be the ones that they don't like authority. They're just they want a variety of, they want to watch the world burn. So you have to approach those people and why they do things and get them motivated differently. And then there's the other part that they're the overachievers and they're bored out of their tree. And so they cause issues too, because they're not being challenged enough. And so you are a leader. You are a middle manager. So you've got to manage for the majority of the people that want to all go in the same direction, but you've also got to try and figure out how to handle those groups on the edges, which you'll be spending most of your time on, and they can cause the most issues. And how you deal with that is probably can make or break you. And you just need to be aware that this exists so you don't get blindsided and then fall apart.
And I would add, part of branch seneschals managing that 20% on either end involves talking to your regional and to the kingdom seneschal, right? This is not the branch seneschal has to handle it all on your own. Having a healthy respect for the chain of command and being willing to say, this is above my pay grade, I need to go up, because sometimes it's a conflict in your group that you need an outsider, right? By that, I mean someone who's not local within the group, to come in and kind of look around and maybe offer some perspective, right? Be willing to do that. You don't have to take all of that on yourself, especially for that 20% that Con referred to on either end of difficulty range. Sedge, did I see your hand up before?
You did, and you largely, between you and Elizabeth's comment earlier, largely touched on it with just being able to pull your help chain and call in the bigger guns, and also having a thick enough skin that some of what we see individually as interpersonal conflict is just personalities rubbing wrong, and that's just something you need to live with and move on. However, there are times where you need to call in the big guns and have somebody further up the food chain come in and slap everybody around for a few minutes.
Well, and sometimes it's not even that so much as it is, here's a perspective that if you're too close to the issue, maybe you haven't thought of yet. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, right. You know, sometimes that larger picture helps, shift perspective, to sound a little bit corny about it. And that's our job, right? That's why there are regional deputies. The East is large, right? And so the regionals have a sense of the groups in their area. The kingdom has a sense of the sort of personality profile of all of the groups. That's why we're here. So if you're a branch seneschal having that kind of experience, definitely know that you've got us to draw on, and it's not some kind of problem to do it. You're not bothering us with it. Other observations or comments or questions on the sort of characteristics of a good seneschal, personal characteristics, things as an individual that you bring to the office? Okay, So let's talk about the duties of the Seneschal. And I'm going to break this into two sections because there's what law says, and then there's what the East Kingdom Seneschal Handbook says. So in law, the Seneschal doesn't have a whole lot of requirements. This is section 7, branches, subsection B. According to EK law, the Seneschal needs to file quarterly reports in a timely way. You need to receive notification that your other branch officers are filing their reports in a timely way. Or if you're a barony that has subgroups, cantons, ridings, or if you're a barony that is sponsoring an incipient branch, you need to receive reports that those officers are filing their reports in a timely way. And you need to use your official email for all correspondence. And that communication section is still to come in our discussion. The Seneschal term of office is set generally by local custom, but is not more than 4 consecutive years, right? So law, EK law, really concerned with filing reports, you'll notice. And that's because that's our communication up to society. And even if your branch is small, even if your branch doesn't have a lot happening, particularly during the pandemic, some branches' quarterly reports were nothing's happening, everything's the same. Still got to file it, right? Even if your branch is relatively small or has maybe one primary activity, getting the reports filed on time is a sign that your group is functioning as it needs to be, right? And so when those group reports are not coming in a timely way, that starts to be a signal that balls are getting dropped, right? That's one of the sort of red flags in the air for the regionals and for myself. I see your hand, Esperanza.
Sorry, I'm asking so many questions.
That's okay. That's why we're having this session. Never apologize for wanting to do your job better.
So the 4 consecutive years, is that a max? Or does somebody do another 4 years if they should actually be so inclined to do so? Or
because some groups are really small, we'd like to develop those so they're not quite so small, but sometimes it is necessary that officers kind of rotate positions. So it is not 4 years forever over the course of you being in that branch, but it is definitely 4 years consecutive. I would not be psyched to see someone serve 4 years, take 6 months off, and then serve 4 years. That's not healthy. But if someone did a 3-year stint, stepped away, did other things, came back a couple years later, they could be Seneschal again. That would be fine. That is one of those things we'd be looking at for how long are officers serving, how are officers rotating, right? So that's what law says about the duties of the Seneschal. And like I said about reports, partly the emphasis in law about reports is because we have to report up, right? And we have to report up or else our kingdom gets in trouble for non-reporting. It takes a while to get to that point, but we never want to get to that point. And so that's why law sort of has that trickle-down emphasis on knowing how branches are doing. The Kingdom Seneschal Handbook, on the other hand, has a lot more of what the duties of a Seneschal actually are, right? Like, what does it take to be able to file your reports? And that section's actually pretty long, so I don't want to go into every single item on it, but I want to highlight the kinds of things that the day-to-day of being a Seneschal involves. I see an observation in the chat. I want to make sure I see that real quick. What does the chat say?
It's source material.
Yes, thank you. And in fact, I was going to point out that the first thing every branch Seneschal should be aware of, is that we have a shared Google Drive that you access via your Seneschal email. Frequently, we will get requests for access from person@yahoo.com, whatever. The reason we control it through the Seneschal email is so that access stays with the office. If we start granting a lot of individual email access, you retain access to the documents when you are no longer Seneschal, and that becomes unworkable very quickly. So access through your office email, there is a wealth of information on that shared drive, including policy documents, previous changes in law, information about ordering insurance certificates, et cetera, right? So that branch drive has a lot of material there. I think sometimes Seneschals might forget that it's there. And I do want to note, we have a brand new spiffy Kingdom Seneschal webpage. If you hold for a sec, I'm going to copy and paste and put that in the chat. It has been overhauled and what I hope will be a more useful format. It's also been redesigned for accessibility and such. That is also a place where you can have news, policy information, and so on. So the shared Google Drive, and also using the East Kingdom Seneschals page. Edith, I see a hand.
Do you want the drive link in chat? Because I can pop it there if you want it there, but you don't have to.
Thanks for asking. Let's go with yes. Not everyone here is a Kingdom Seneschal. Some people, excuse me, only one person here is a Kingdom Seneschal. Not everyone here is a branch Seneschal. So if you're interested in becoming a branch Seneschal, knowing that the drive is a resource for you if you take the office, and again, controlled through the office email so that we don't have a whole lot of additional traffic, so to speak. All right, some highlights from, excuse me, I lost my tab. Some highlights from the Seneschal Handbook about responsibilities of the branch Seneschal. First and foremost, read Corpora, the Society Seneschal's Handbook, East Kingdom Law, East Kingdom Seneschal Handbook, various policies such as the bullying and harassment policy, our policies regarding minors, the social media policy. You don't have to memorize them. You have to refer to them often. I myself do not attempt to make definitive statements without reviewing the section that relates to it, right? This is not a situation where you need to have everything right at your fingertips. You need to know where the information is to go look at it. And in that order, generally, Corpora, Society Seneschal, East Kingdom Law, East Kingdom Seneschal Handbook. I generally start at the top and go down just to make sure I'm not missing something. And Edith is offering to assist anyone who is a branch Seneschal having trouble accessing the shared Google Drive. Contact her at lawclerk, one word, lawclerk at eastkingdom.org, and she'll help get your access to the shared drive sussed out. So know the policy, be familiar with it generally, always be willing to say, you know what, I think this is the case, but I've got to double check before I can say definitively. That's fine. There's no expectation that you have all of this memorized. The expectation is that you're generally familiar and then know where to find it before you say something definitive. Make every effort to attend Curia because you are your branch's representative to the Crown when the Crown holds Curia. And so part of managing your branch is knowing what your branch's views on proposed law changes are and being able to share that with Crown. Another major responsibility is overseeing the business of the branch, obviously, checking your email regularly, holding regular branch meetings consistent with your branch policy, at least one business meeting per quarter. Some branches have monthly, whatever works for your branch. You need to have an emergency deputy for all of the required offices, as I mentioned before, including for Seneschal. Because as we have all learned, right, things happen quickly, and the required offices need to be continually accessed for the healthy running of a group. So there's a lot of sort of day-to-day business of running a branch. One of the things that makes a branch run successfully, in my view, is kind of checking in regularly instead of going away in 2 weeks, catching up, right? That a kind of daily, every other daily checking in to make sure that concerns are being heard, questions are being answered, future planning is happening, and so on. So I'll stop here for questions or comments. What might local branch seneschals ask about the day-to-day running and the day-to-day duties? One thing I will note is we have an upcoming Exchequer 101 session about the same time in October. Excuse me. One of the day-to-day running of a branch that the seneschal must be on your branch's financial committee, and the seneschal must be a signatory on your branch's checking account. The pandemic has made that sometimes a little bit difficult to achieve with things that have happened having to go to a branch in person, but it's really important that especially the bank account signatory be kept up to date. Branches have unexpectedly found themselves in hot water where, as a result of something else entirely, we've had to come in and have a conversation about the checking account, and then it turns out that the correct people are not signatories on the account. And so now there's a new problem that needs solving, right? So please make sure that you're prioritizing upon coming into office signatories on the account. I see Esperanza, go ahead. And then Khan, I think I see a comment from you in the comments. So we'll Esperanza first, and then we'll take Khan's point from the chat.
My question is regarding job of Seneschal with regards to people holding events, and if I'm correct in my understanding, I as Seneschal cannot host and run events in my local district,
yes,
like under my command.
Right. Yes. And that's to have a layer of accountability and to avoid burnout, right? Because you are the sort of backstop for whatever is happening at an event. So if you're also running the event, there's no backstop because it's you, right? Now you, Esperanza.
But if I was to host a barony event, then the barony seneschal is checking me.
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to say, you as a canton seneschal, you can run something that's being hosted by Ruhenthallen, right? Because you are not the Ruhenthallen seneschal.
Right.
Yes, that's fine. All right, Khan, I'm going to take a quick minute to read your comment. So Khan's observing that the term curia has different meanings, and he's correct in the chat there. Generally, when I am saying curia, I mean the kingdom level meeting that each crown must hold at least once. And that is where any proposed changes to law happen. That is where the crown hears advice from the branches as needed, and so on. Khan, could you say a few words? You say that term curia is different in Tiamara?
Yes, it's been that way for the almost 30 years I've been in the SCA. Here we use curia to mean the officers of a branch, and it's also when they get together and have a formal meeting. So I am on the curia of my canton, I'm on the curia of my barony, and I'm on the curia of the principality. And there is often confusion when speaking to people from the rest of the kingdom, because everywhere else, curia specifically refers to the meeting that is held at least once a year and sometimes more, where it's the greater officers and the crown. And I only wanted to put that in the chat for the Tamaran Seneschal so that there's no confusion, because somebody who's not familiar with it doesn't know about the culture difference. They might get the wrong impression that it's only a once a year thing.
Yes, thank you. And that is also an inter-kingdom anthropology issue. I believe at least Middle Kingdom, if not some others, use the term curia in a more frequent, anytime the crown and greater officers are meeting, they are calling it curia. So that's, when I am saying curia, I'm definitely referring to crown kingdom officers as required by law changes type of meeting. And if your branch, any branch, Tamara or elsewise, uses that term curia to refer to your branch meeting of officers, that's fine, right? There's no prohibition against it. Some do, they find it convenient, some don't, so that to keep it clear from the kingdom requirement. That's a local custom choice, totally fine. Elspeth, I see your hand.
Hi, yes, just want to expand a little bit for Esperanza. The other reason a seneschal, you're not allowed to be an autocrat, is if an autocrat is having issues in terms of enforcing any rules, they have to be able to go to someone, the higher authority, and that's the seneschal. So you can't it's very complicated to try to wear two hats at once, especially with all the current rules we have in place for events now. Given Maeve's letter a few weeks ago, we know that not every group is had been diligent that weekend about enforcing rules about masking. So who do you go to? You have to be able to go to someone, and that would be the branch seneschal.
Thanks, Elspeth. We are going to talk in a moment pandemic specifics, because that's its own category of thing. But are there questions or observations about generally the day-to-day job of being seneschal, what it takes, what the duties are, that kind of thing?
I got one thing for you, because I couldn't find where the hand went to.
That's okay.
One thing that I just ran into is that's goes along with what you're already saying, but it's good to kind of keep an ear out, because something that probably should have just gone to me directly actually went to me by a third party, and there's personalities and people wanting to talk to certain people and not others. And so it got resolved around a kind of a loop as opposed to just a kind of direct thing. So
yeah, cultivating anyone can talk with the seneschal, even if you think you're going to disagree with the seneschal, right, is a tricky thing. But roundabout loops of communication about issues are really difficult and can really undermine a group quickly. And so to the best that you can, one of the personality profile elements of being a good seneschal is being able to hear issues, even if you disagree with them, in a way that is productive for the group. Yeah, Thomas, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Me.
Or Leo. Hi, Leo.
Wondering about what we should be reading about the Exchequer documents, because that is like one of the biggest things like I have the hardest time with. So like, what do we need to know around that? What documents are the best to start there?
I would start with the Exchequer's webpage and the materials that are available there for local exchequers, because we are, again, as seneschals, the backstop for the branch, right? And hopefully the exchequer and the seneschal are in frequent communication and are able to, anticipate or otherwise resolve issues quickly and together. I am looking forward myself to the Exchequer 101 session coming up next month, because someone recently on Facebook said, what's the, what kind of officer job would you never want? And a whole lot of seneschals said, I would never be Exchequer. And a whole lot of exchequer said, I would never be seneschal. I was actually really amused by that. and you know, that's also kingdom level saying about their counterparts. It was really kind of funny. But I would definitely start with having a sense of what the exchequers report on about running bank statements and what their numbers are for reporting to their regional, their kingdom profiles, right? My sense is that it is not a difficult job per se, but because it involves money, lots of folks get skittish, right? So it's about what kinds of things are reimbursable, what kind of receipt or advances in ahead of an event versus reimbursement after an event, those sorts of things, right? Having a good working knowledge of what can we do with kingdom funds and what can we not do. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm just looking, what is so besides the website, is there like a document I should read, or just start there and just talk to my local exchequer and they can point me in the right direction?
I would say start with your local exchequer, in part because I don't have that document called up right now, and I'm going to take 5 minutes of looking very distracted to find it. If someone else has the ability to talk and read at the same time, I would welcome that in the chat as a suggestion. But at the moment, I can't pull that up. Anybody who's got it handy is welcome to drop that in the chat and let us know. I see Cedric and then I see Joel.
So I believe it was Elspeth who brought it up earlier. Seneschals are managers. They are our middle management. And the job of middle management is not to know how to do everybody else's job. The role of middle management is to know how to tell when everybody else is not doing their job. You do not need to know how to do how to know what they do, but you need to be able to say, okay, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to be doing something that involves this, and I haven't seen one of those, and I should have. So it gives you a starting point to start poking at it. Putting it in terms of, I work in a factory, and I have sat in the seat of a middle manager, and it really does come down to, I don't need to know how to do your job, but I do need to know how to tell if you are doing your job. And it's a subtle difference, but it really is as simple as, I need to know what evidence to look for that says you're doing your job. If I don't find that evidence, then you start digging and poking and prodding and whatnot. But that's really the start. And there are documents that exist, just like in the Seneschal and it looks like Joel has posted them. That govern the kingdom level, and there's probably even local level exchequer documents that kind of give guidance on how things are supposed to operate. Just knowing that those exist and knowing where they are is really kind of where your requirement is at. Maybe skim through the table of contents, something like that. You don't need to have it memorized. You don't need to really dig through it, but you do need to be able to say, I feel like I saw a chapter about underwater basket weaving. I should go look that up because I don't see any baskets. So I'm gonna go look for that. And that's really where it comes from. And that just stacks all the way up. As a regional, part of my job is to look for evidence that the other regionals are doing what they need to be doing or not. As the kingdom level, she needs to look for, are the kingdom levels doing what they're supposed to be doing? It's the same job, just with a slightly different take on it. Does that help anybody?
I would add that that's the difference of not micromanaging, right? Micromanaging is trying to do other people's jobs, whereas effective middle management is knowing what to look for and trusting that they're doing their jobs and you're getting the evidence that you need that says, yes, they're doing their jobs as they ought, right? As opposed to micromanaging, which is far more hands-on and most of the time unnecessary. Joel?
So yes, I posted the link to the specific page on the Exchequer's, the East Kingdom Exchequer site, that's got links to all of the various handbooks and pieces of policy, just like in the Seneschalate, where there's corpora and then there's the society handbook, and there's an important distinction, an important difference with the Seneschalate. It's corpora, seneschal, society seneschal policy, East Kingdom law, then the Kingdom Seneschal's handbook. In financial policy, the Kingdom Officers Handbook actually supersedes Kingdom law. So the Kingdom Exchequer's Handbook has to be approved by the BOD when changes are made. So knowing that there's that difference, and it is, as far as I'm aware, the only place where there is that difference. So the East Kingdom Exchequer's Handbook supersedes East Kingdom law. So it changes what order you need to read this stuff in. There's not a heck of a lot in the Kingdom Handbook, though, so it isn't that big of a deal. But yeah, knowing where these things are, skimming over them. From what I've seen, the biggest place where seneschals would possibly find the most value is knowing what the restrictions are, because we're a charitable organization, that are buried in there. Because you get a lot of people who either want to spend money on things that we can't, give money to groups that we can't, or fundraise in ways that we can't. The piece that gets particularly complicated for, I believe in this crowd, Esperanza and Khan, is that I'm fairly certain that none of those documents correctly handle Canadian rules. 99% certain, but I'm not in Canada, so I'm not sure of that either.
Thanks, Joel. I'd highlight particularly of the things that we're not allowed to do because we are a nonprofit, fundraising ideas along the lines of raffles, for example, can get us into a lot of trouble very quickly. And it's because well-intentioned people are trying to help, and they're trying to help in the ways that they know, right? But we still can't do it. And so part of the being willing to say no to your friends is recognizing their good intent and their earnestness and steering it in a direction that they can put it into, instead of just shutting it down. When I was saying earlier about being creative, this is the kind of thing I meant, right? Not just saying, no, you can't do that thing, but also saying, but here's what you can do, or here's how you can modify that thing into what we're, allowed to do because of our nonprofit status. Edith, and then Audrey.
Popping back up to the staying informed about what the other branch officers are doing and making sure that everybody's reporting. As a local branch seneschal, it's not just you being mean. Kingdom law says you have to do this. Kingdom law says, in fact, and if anybody needs a section site, I can give it to you. Local branch officers who report upstream to a Kingdom officer or a Kingdom officer deputy are required to tell their seneschal that, yes, they have filed their reports on time. If you're not getting the loop back from the local officers, ask them, because they're supposed to tell you this stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be adversarial, as Edith says, right? To the extent that, sort of monthly check-ins can just be, whatever the reporting schedule is, but having it just be established practice. Hey, everybody, let me know you sent in your reports. Great, cool, thanks, right? The more that we can normalize this and make it just part of standard reporting, the healthier group dynamics go, instead of having to trace down everybody, and now it's conflict. Audrey?
So two things. I want to wrap back to sort of what you just said. We've talked sort of a lot about don't be afraid to be the bad guy. Don't focus on being the bad guy. Be the good guy. Whenever you have the ability, be the good guy, because the adage, you can get more flies with honey than with vinegar, actually means something. And what you're doing, and Cedric has mentioned this, is that you are the linchpin of building a community. And that's huge, because the bigger your community is, the healthier your group is. And to sort of wrap back to Leo's question about, you know, what do we as Seneschals need to know? I want to go back to what Ced said. You need to know when they need to report. And that's the big thing. You as a Seneschal don't have to know everything, because dear God, there's a lot to know. Know how to find the answer. Know how to find the answer. And if you don't know how to find the answer, reach out to the next step up. Or if it's an exchequer kind of question, reach out to your exchequer. That's why you have officers in your local group. You don't do everything. Your job is to literally make sure that your community is functioning healthy. That's your job.
I see Edith has reminded us, thank you. Pike staff lists the reporting schedule. So in addition to the requirement that you read Pike staff, right, you can always return to it to remind yourself of things like that, right, of the reporting schedule and other kinds of things that appear in every Pike staff. We've had a quick review recently to make sure that those reporting schedules are accurate. I know some of them were not, so thank you. Con was one of the people who pointed an area out that needed improvement, right? Whenever you see stuff like that, absolutely reach out to me. I'll help, you know, find out who's got to fix it and get it fixed, because the Pike staff is our base newsletter and needs to be accurate so that we can trust what it says. Audrey, your hand is up again, or still up from before? Okay. I want to move on a little bit to pandemic specifics of being a branch seneschal. These weird times, trademark, has brought an additional layer of responsibilities, for which I thank all of you for being in it with me, for staying in it, for being willing to take the job, even though we're here where we are, right? This has been a time. And I want to acknowledge that and really genuinely thank everybody. But on to pandemic specific requirements about being a branch seneschal. First and foremost, know the government requirements for where your branch is. Federal, provincial, state, city, whatever layer of regulations there are that applies to where your branch is, know what they are. Know how frequently they change. If you are planning an event and you're a few months out, make sure you're checking that resource regularly for any updates since, you know, you started planning your event that might have shifted what you do at your event. No kingdom and society policy. The brand new Seneschal page, East Kingdom Seneschal page, which is earlier in the chat, has a news section where announcements are posted. I try really hard to post announcements in all of the places, both official and unofficial. I tend to wallpaper the kingdom with announcements, but that can sometimes make it hard to find again. So know that they are always on the East Kingdom Seneschal page, so that you're not trying to do a search, and make sure you've got the most recent one by searching your email or scrolling through a Facebook group or something like that. What else? Check in with your members, especially in this moment of, you know, I don't want to say post-pandemic, because clearly we are not, but as we are returning to increasing levels of activity, how do your branch members feel about that? Some might be really eager and some might not yet be ready. If your branch as a whole has a leaning either way, respect that and look for creative ways to meet the needs of your branch. Continue to be flexible, even, for example, as business meetings might return to in-person meetings, maybe you still have an online monitor as part of the meeting so that folks who are not yet comfortable with the in-person or who can't make it because of the time of day, you know, they can't travel to get there in time, but they can tune in from wherever they are, right? Look for ways to continue to kind of reflect the unevenness of our moment, right? It's gonna be up and down for a while, right? This kind of is our new normal. We're not just gonna kind of snap back to pre-pandemic, 2019 ways of doing things, right? So make sure you're actively checking in with your branch about how your populace is feeling in our current moment. Remember that the Kingdom Financial Council has made reimbursement available for COVID safety supplies, COVID safety supplies like antibacterial wipes, like disposable masks, those sorts of things. So if that is something that can help your branch have safe in-person gatherings, we can help you out. Yeah, pointing out online that some branches had online components of their business meetings even before the pandemic because it really helped people stay connected, especially through the winter. I think that's a really strong point. Rather than trying to keep scheduling a business meeting around the weather, having that online component and having it be an established part of the culture, I think can really help with engagement and retention, right? That being able to show up and participate in whatever way you can helps a group through periods of storminess, literal and metaphorical. You might want to consider, as part of holding in-person gatherings, having a box of disposable masks, right? So that people who forget theirs or it fell in the mud or whatever, right? But just sort of having it there as part of having your in-person gathering, especially for larger events, right? Maybe not every single fencing practice, but if your branch is sponsoring, an event, right? The sort of thing we think about as an event, that might be something you can do to help establish both safety and just general comfort, right? That the branch is doing what it can to attend to these concerns. Does that make sense? Are there questions or observations on the sort of pandemic specific aspect of being a seneschal? I do want to emphasize, and I know this is especially relevant for Tamara, what the government says is always the thing that you do, right? So I know in Tamara, the various provinces, I think all of them in the East, but if not all of them, then most of them in the East have started requiring vaccination cards, vaccination passports to go to public gatherings of various types. So if you're holding an event and you're in a province that requires that, that is what you do, right? Let me know, we'll work out the specifics. But if you've got a government requirement, then talk with me about how your group will do it, as opposed to whatever conflict, right? I'm not sure if that's Thomas or Leo, but the square labeled Thomas has your hand up.
So contact tracing, is there an official way that we should be handling that? Somebody's just like, oh, they're out of practice, now they come down with COVID. Do we do the contact tracing? Do we send it off to somebody? What is the official procedure? Do we have that in place?
Yes. So contact tracing is necessary for every in-person gathering. You need the legal name and a way to contact that person, either their phone number or their email, whatever they choose to provide. We do not do the contact tracing. If someone, if there's an exposure at, say, a fencing practice, someone comes to you and says, hey, that practice I was at 2 days ago, I've since come down, I've since had a positive diagnosis. The marshal who ran that practice or the branch seneschal basically contacts your local health authority and they do the contact tracing, right? You hand over the contact tracing sheet and you say, these are the people who are at this event where this exposure was. They take it from there. You could, in official channels or Facebook groups or whatever, say, hey, if you were at this particular fencing practice, be aware that there has been a positive test case a couple days later, take appropriate steps. You can do something general like that, but the person who ran the practice or the branch seneschal is not responsible for doing the one-to-one contact tracing notifications. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Con?
Just on that, and because of the general pandemic response, be very certain that whatever you do conforms to the law. In my province, if anyone was to just say, oh, hey, look, we've had an exposure at this event, you'd be in hot water with the public health people and the privacy people, because the way it's being handled here is the government handles it all. They will inform the organization, hey, look, there's been an exposure here. They do all the contact tracing, and when they announce it publicly, it's in a way that you basically won't be able to trace it back to anybody because of privacy concerns. So just in general, with all the pandemic stuff, I would say you're better, make sure you're following your actual legal guidelines first, worry about society later. If there's a conflict, yes, let your regional and let Maeve know that, hey, here's how we're handling it versus how the SCA wants us to handle it. And just take it from there. And also in that context, in pandemic regulations, you really have to be fully accepting of possibly embracing that bad guy role, because there's not a whole room for touchy-feely, or there might not be room for rounding the edges when you are essentially having to enforce regulations. Like right now, you don't have time to argue with the person. It's just, you need to go, or we need to be calling the police right now. So, but you have to, there's that fine line. You don't want to be like, rah, 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 but you absolutely need to be aware of what the consequences could be for you personally, the SCA, and your branch.
And if I can add on to that, thanks, Con. The Seneschals are my people, and I have your collective backs, right? I am here for you. If you need to escalate and call me because someone is being a problem at the gate of your event, call me, right? Don't be like, oh, I don't want to bother. Call me. That's why I'm here, right? I am here for the Seneschals. I'm here to help you get through things like that. The Seneschal has the authority. And in this example, event stewards are considered to be Seneschals. They are deputy Seneschals for the time of running their event. Seneschals have the authority to remove someone from site if they won't leave because they are not in compliance with whatever they're supposed to be in compliance with. You've told them what it is. They've actively refused to do it, right? So you're being polite, helpful, maybe you didn't realize, but we've passed that point and the person is actively not in compliance and won't leave the site. You have the authority to call the police because that person is now trespassing. Let's hope we don't get there, but know that you can. Edith?
Reinforcing Con's point about fuzzy edges with regards to viral exposures. Because I've got two hats on this one. I'm also the Kingdom Throne Weapons Marshal, and we had to do some research on this. If an exposure has developed and you find out about it that at some practice or a guild meeting or an event or whatever, the person who finds out that they have it, the health authorities are supposed to take it from the medical professionals. You know, when they have a positive test, the test results are supposed to be reported up. That person should tell the marshal or the seneschal, so that the marshal or the seneschal knows that the information, contact tracing information from that practice or meeting or whatever is going to be requested. But the marshal or the seneschal almost certainly should not put a note out in general terms that says, hey, there was an exposure at thus and such a practice, because at that point, you are also exposing your branch to a potential privacy issue. To say nothing of opening up the can of worms of, as soon as you post that generally, everybody who was at that practice is going to be on your case for more information, which you don't have. And even if you do, you can't tell them. The only thing that the marshal or seneschal can do is provide the contact tracing information to the health authorities as soon as it is requested. If the person who did test positive chooses themselves on a personal level to get in touch one-on-one with the other people who were at the practice, that's fine. You're off the hook. They're allowed to do that because it's a personal thing. But if you do that in an official capacity, you have just opened up your branch to a potential problem.
And
anyway.
And this is why we have deputies. Con and Edith, thank you for that correction. I was a little loose in what I was saying about what a branch might do. Don't. If there is an exposure, follow the government directions, health branches about reporting, but don't make general announcements. Esperanza and then Elspeth.
Just following up on the, sometimes you have to be the bad guy, and I have no problem putting the hammer down and saying, these are the rules, follow them. I want to clarify, maybe my other tier Marids can help me understand. I know in the US, you guys as a group can say, this is our group's rules and you have to follow them or we can call police. Do we have that ability up here? Because I was under the understanding that if it's not already illegal, we can't call police on them for something that's not illegal. So I would really love somebody to clarify for me. For example, if we say, if Nova Scotia drops its mask mandate, which it is planning to, and I really hope it doesn't, because I'm not ready for that.
So
but if it does, and we say, but you have to wear masks for our event, and they say, but it's not against the law, public health law anymore, where does my authority go?
So I'm not Tier Marin, but I want to sort of reframe your question to help
Yes,
maybe you think through that. It's not because it's illegal. It's because technically your event is private and you can ask anybody to leave your private event at any time.
Okay.
If they stop doing a thing that is against your group's rules, you can say, I'm sorry, you are no longer welcome at this private event. And that's the key clinch pin there.
And that's when it's trespassing.
Okay. That's the key word, is private event. This
right.
is gonna sound very funny. Is there a way we can get an official worded sentence that I can have in my back pocket for that?
I can get you one. Yes.
Thank you.
We shouldn't really need one because that's a basic legal tenet here. It's like a business here, if they have rules for how you get in, like you must have tie and jacket, they can legally refuse you entry because that's their rules.
Yeah, the difference is that the sort of misnomer's not the wrong word. The misconception for the SCA as a whole is people generally believe it's a public event because we are a nonprofit. So I understand where you're coming from, Esperanza, because I do this at my job. I'm like, okay, I understand the principle, but I want words that I can use to have in my back pocket for when that situation happens, because it's technically speaking a private event. Now, if it's a demo, that's where things get a little weirder because they're open to the public, generally speaking.
And I would say this isn't just about pandemic issues. If someone is drinking on a site that doesn't allow alcohol, or if someone is smoking in a site that doesn't allow smoking, right? This is any of those sorts of violating what's allowed, and they refuse to stop doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, Elspeth?
Audrey actually covered a lot of it, but just to reinforce everything, it is a private event when it's private when it's an event we're sponsoring and hosting. And language use is going to be very specific. It's don't call the police saying, oh, well, our rules say he has to wear a mask. He's not wearing a mask. Would you do something about it? It doesn't matter what rule they violated. Your call does not need to include that information. It is simply, we are hosting a private event on X site. This person is now trespassing on our private event, will not leave voluntarily. We need assistance having him removed or her removed. So they don't care which rule it is. I actually had a Seneschal say, well, if they're not putting masks on and we say they have to have masks, the police aren't going to come if we say, hey, they're not wearing masks and those are our rules. And he's correct, but it's a different conversation than we have someone who's trespassing at our private event. We need assistance removing him. He will not leave. He or she will not leave voluntarily, regardless of what rule it is they're violating.
So I see in the chat, yeah, we can get that kind of short script with a reminder that if things have escalated to the point where you need to call authorities for assistance, it's not because they won't wear a mask, it's because they're trespassing. Joel noted in the chat as well, another example is if someone who's been R&D'd, removed, and I forget what the R and the D is, but that means
denied, I believe.
Or denied.
yes. In short, they may not participate in the STA at all. And if it turns out that they're at your event and trying to gain entry and being forceful about trying to gain entry and won't leave gate, that is a reason to call for assistance, right?
Those sort of short script answers are actually a really good thing to throw in the Google Drive.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. This is exactly kind of what I was looking for. I know I have to control these situations should they occur, but how do I do that? This is great.
Yeah. Elspeth, I see your hand. Is that new or is that from before?
Just a little bit of an add-on there is, oh God, I'm gonna lose my thought. Oh, it had to do with, let me back up, Jen. Sorry for the fumble words here. So that's yet another reason why the Seneschal shouldn't be the autocrat, because at that point, the authorities need to be called. You are the president of the organization hosting the private event. So you are the legal representative, which is also something you may want to add in when you contact, if you ever have to do it. I hope nobody ever does, but that's also another important reason why Seneschal should be at the events if all possible, shouldn't be the event stewards, because this kicks up to you because, paperwork.
And we have kind of moved on into ideas about communication generally, right? Just the more that you can do, the more consistent, the more clear. I think lots of sort of smooth working of branches or less smooth working of branches often comes down to communication. And so being in frequent touch with, knowing what's happening with, setting expectations about, so how did that go? How can we do it better? Follow-ups, all of that sort of thing with your branch officers, with folks running events, with your branch populace, right? I thought I saw a hand. Joel, was that you? Did you take it down?
It was. We were starting to move on, but
no, go ahead.
Sort
please.
of as a direct follow on to Elsbeth. This is why, if for some reason as Seneschal you cannot be at an event, making sure that you have another designee in place who is at the event, who is not the autocrat, to act in your stead, because you do not know when that bit of ugly is going to turn up, and you really need to be there in authority, whether or not it's you, it's someone.
And your autocrat, your event steward and staff, they need to know who that person is.
Yeah. And there is going to be, hosted by Elsbeth, coming up in November, Event Steward 101. So that will be an element that we're reinforced at that time. And just talking about communication generally, I really want to encourage branch seneschals, deputies to, have sort of like office hours, right? Like, this is when I'm reachable, this is when I am on, so that you have times when you are off, right? It can feel like a lot of communication is email comes in, I've got to answer right away. And, sometimes that's fine, but sometimes you are in the middle of whatever it is you do and you can't drop it to deal with that issue, right? Having a sense of what needs an immediate response, having a sense of this is something I can handle at the end of the day, right? And being clear about that with your folks, right? Emergencies are different. Emergencies happen. But in terms of daily running of branches, right? If folks know they're going to hear from you, say, every evening, then generally that's going to be fine, or every morning, whatever the schedule is, right? So that your accessibility is transparent in the name of not having to always be on, right? That's how burnout happens, is that sense of never being able to step back and step away, right? So communicating within the branch, communicating within the seneschalate chain, right? Communicating with the populace, right? Within the branch officers, communicating with the populace of your branch. Do we have specific observations or questions about communication? And Cedric, after that, you're going to be up, just to let you know.
Fair.
On the topic of communication styles or requirements, anything folks wanted to bring up? Audrey, is that you?
Yeah, that's me actually raising my hand. So one of the big catches, especially, and this is specific to the East, is that your email is run through Google, through the Gmail system, and it is super important you change your from to your office email, not your member email. And the reason for that is that when the office transfers to your successor, all of that information is copied over to them. And that's the flag that tells them to copy this information. So anything that comes in to seneschal@eastkingdom.org is going to get copied to Maeve's successor. Now, if Maeve responds to an email, but she doesn't change the from to Seneschal@East Kingdom, the response isn't going to get sent. And there's important, there's a walkthrough on how to do that on the Webminister website. And I would also note that there's also a setting in there that you can change it so that if you happen to hold multiple offices like I did for a while, if somebody sends something to Seneschal at eastkingdom.org and somebody sends something to court@eastkingdom.org, when I reply, it automatically fills in what office it's coming from. So there is a setting in Gmail for that, and I strongly encourage everybody to use it.
Joel has put a link from a web ministry from one of those tools in the chat. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks, Joel.
And that is also why communicating from your office address is so important. Sometimes people will reply both from their individual and their office. I suppose that's okay. I'd really strongly encourage to have the habit of just replying from your office. I have sometimes screwed that up, and so I will reply from 12345 at members East Kingdom, and then I will re-forward it from Seneschal and say, like, oops, sorry, for the official record, right? just to make sure that things carry to my successor, because that history of communication is really important sometimes for later conflict resolution of
And
a
the-
variety of sorts.
And the other thing that I would add there is that if somebody reaches out to you via, I don't know, Facebook Messenger, or they catch you at an event, always, always, always ask them to send you an email to your official email. That way there is a registration of it for successors. Because if there's ever a situation where somebody needs to go back into the annals of the history of the East Kingdom Seneschal, we have it. And so that's super important.
You know, and that's a thing that happens pretty regularly. It's not just a hypothetical. You know, and some folks communicate via different platforms. You can always send a follow-up email, you know, hey, here's a quick summary of my understanding of our phone call on this date. Summary, thanks, sign off, right? So it can be sometimes difficult to redirect conversations to email only. They happen in the moment, and you have to have them in that moment, but you can send the follow-up email for the record, so that there's that institutional knowledge. Other communication observations or questions? All right, at this point, we're going to move on to one of the more difficult aspects about managing conflict. And here I'm just going to turn it over to Cedric. Take it away.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Cedric.
And no. So a little bit of background. Professionally, I am a professional problem solver. I am a continuous improvement engineer, and I am also a process trainer, a lead process trainer. So I teach process trainers how to teach better. So between the two, one of the things that I'm doing is there's a lot of leadership development type stuff in what I'm teaching. And one of the big pieces, and this is all for a factory in aviation, and one of the big pieces of this is teaching people how to deal with conflict, how to manage it. And I've got a slideshow from my company that I got pulled up over here that I'm not going to share because of proprietary stuff. But if you see me looking over, that's what's going on. But the basic tenets of it, I mean, it's a good segue that we're moving from communication, because realistically, communication is where 80% or more of conflict resolution comes from. And this kind of touches on one of those basic skills that we need as seneschals, is we need to be able to listen to and engage with every side of the conversation. And we need to try and actually absorb the other people's points and perspectives, even if we disagree with them. We need to be able to listen to them and give it a fair shake. Because frankly, when we communicate, communication is completely about taking the idea that's in your head and putting it in somebody else's head. And frankly, most of us suck at it. And that's just a statement of truth. That is not to say that anybody is particularly worse or better than the other, but the idea that I have in my head is not the same one that you have in yours for any given word. We've kind of, as a culture, as a species, agreed that the sound "and" means we're putting two ideas together. That's just a verbal agreement. That's a cognitive agreement that we've made across the board. But when I say the word blue, I have an image in my head that's different than the one that's inside yours, because your eyes are different, your experiences are different, your entire life is different. So when we're communicating, when we're trying to address the issue, whatever the issue happens to be, we need to try to get past all of that. In the chat, I've posted a link to, and this is totally, I just kind of grabbed it at random, a visual bias chart, or a cognitive bias chart. And I put that in there because one of the easiest things that one of the easiest traps that we all fall into is assuming that everybody in the world has the same filters and the same cognitive biases that we do. And they don't, because their life is different than yours. And so back to that ideas and communication thing, we need to be able to look at their idea and try and weed through any communication problems, any biases that they might have, any biases that you might have, and find that idea that they're trying to put in your head. There's a lot to be said for the concept of don't assume malice, assume ignorance. Most people have good ideas. Most of the ideas that are brought to the table are a good idea. Sometimes you have to figure out, okay, how can this possibly be a good idea? And kind of dig at it a little bit to be able to find that place. But the vast majority of these ideas are good ideas. The vast majority of these problems are people not being able to communicate effectively with each other. So how do you deal with that? Communication breaks down to, let me rephrase, effective communication breaks down to 4 steps. You have somebody who sends a message. You have somebody who receives the message. You have somebody who validates and rephrases the message to kind of confirm it. And then you either say yes or no. So I'm going to guess that most everybody in this chat has been in some sort of relationship in your life, where now correct me if I'm wrong. I'm betting you've all had this conversation where one of the people in this relationship is talking to the other while the other one is walking out of the room. Maybe it's you walking out of the room. Maybe it's the other person walking out of the room. And the expectation is from the speaker that the receiver is going to hear everything. But that's not how sound works. So just because you've spoken it, just because you've sent the message out, cool. Did they receive the message? Did they hear what you were saying? It's an important thing to kind of think of and listen to. And in the Seneschal world, that particular problem is not one that we have often, but it leads straight into, and this one is a problem in the Seneschal world. Did the receiver understand what you have to say? How many of you guys have been in a conversation with a significant other where you're like, hey, can you grab me a beer? And they're like, sure, I'll bring you the laundry. We've all had that conversation. Every one of us, maybe different words, but we have all had it. And that is the second piece of it. The receiver has to receive and understand the message, whatever the message happened to be. So there's a lot of reasons why the message wasn't received. And this is where cognitive biases come in, because if they are expecting your message to say something, they are predisposed to hearing whatever it is you said in that way, regardless of what it is you said. So that they have kind of imprinted a script in their head for what it is they're expecting you to say. Maybe you actually say it. Maybe you don't. You do this too. You do this to every conversation that you've had with everybody you've ever had in your life. Human beings fill in conversation patterns with things that we think we know. And we plug in patterns and we arguably one of the reasons why humans are one of the dominant species in the planet is because pattern recognition. It's what we do. We look for patterns in everything and we just put them together, and it generally works out pretty well, but not always. So that's why for effective communication, you want to have that return signal. No, I didn't want laundry. I wanted a beer. Don't bring me laundry, bring me beer. So that's where you get to have that return, that validation, that, okay, did they hear what it is I said? And again, often when we're having a conflict, that step is super important. And then the last piece of it is, yes, I wanted that beer. No, I didn't want that laundry. Okay, Got it. The message is clear. Having those 4 steps kind of met is super important. And it's important when you're having conflict. It's really important to slow down and take the time to understand and actually think through, okay, step 1. Yep. Step 2. Maybe their head was in a dryer. Maybe they didn't hear me. Maybe I slurred. Maybe they were watching the football game and not really paying attention. Maybe the list could go on. If we have the actual effective communication of what the idea is, then we can actually start to resolve the conflict. But the very first step is that communication piece. And that's really arguably one of the most important pieces of it. And it requires a certain level of critical thinking. It requires a level of us stopping and actually working through the process of, this is how we effectively communicate. Did I tick all of those boxes? Because if I didn't, that presents an opportunity for something to go sideways. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but go back and check to make sure that I got it all the boxes ticked at least. And this is not a guarantee, even going through what I'm saying now. This is not, there is no 100%. This helps improve chances. The next thing you need to consider is the message itself. So presuming you are the sender of the message, who are you sending this message to? Do they want to listen to you? Are they predisposed to listening to you or not? That needs to be taken into account. And again, it doesn't matter who or what we're talking about. If you don't know the audience, then you need to frame your message in a very clear, concise, and repetitive way so that you can get that idea from your head into the head of somebody else who you don't know. So you don't know what their biases are. You don't know how they think. You don't know what they have in common with you or what they have different from you. And so looking at it and getting to know and understanding, okay, what does my audience value? What do they think? What do they like? What do they dislike? And what do I actually want you to know in my message? Like, what are the key salient points? What do I actually care that you walk away with? And that's super important when you're building your message. So when you're having a conversation with somebody that you have traditionally have a conflict with, you need to craft a message in such a way that it takes that into account and smooths things over as much as possible, validates them as a person, validates them as a I get where you're coming from. Historically, we haven't really gotten along a lot on this, but I think on this we can agree and start with something very general that, yes, we can agree. And sometimes you have to start super general. I think we agree that you don't want me to kill you. I mean, that's a place that you can start from. Depending on the person that you're having the conversation with, that'll work better than others. You have to know the audience. That really is super important. Then you have to start thinking about, okay, what kind of message do I want to send? Some categories of messages include things like directive messages, cooperative messages, questioning messages, encouraging messages, sharing messages. And that's, you can give the same information with each of those. You can, hey, you should get me some tacos. That is a very directive way of sending a message. And in some cases, that's a fantastic way of doing it. It's super effective. It's super blunt. If, for example, I'm a cis white guy and I were to say that to a smaller woman who's been in an abusive relationship, maybe that's not going to go over too well. So I need to frame my message in a way that my audience, this small woman who ideally I know she's been in an abusive relationship, I need to phrase it and frame it in such a way that she is going to receive it the way I intend it to. Congratulations, the internet. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Um, taking all of these things into effect or into account and understanding how they are going to receive the message is more important than how you say it. Because really the important part of any communication is taking the idea from your head and putting it in theirs. So anything that will achieve that goal is the correct thing. Sometimes it's interpretive dance. Sometimes it's sign language, like ASL. Um, sometimes it's tonalities, sometimes it's vocal, sometimes it's finger pointing, sometimes it depends. It is completely variable. It changes depending on the audience member, depending on the message that you're trying to transmit. That said, all of those pieces are really the foundational keys, and that's why, as seneschals, one of the things that you really need to pay attention to. I said earlier that we're politicians. All politicians do is specialize in sending messages. They try to send the message they want the people to receive. Usually they're trying to manipulate people into voting for them again or giving them money, sure, but it's still about, and we're doing the same thing just with a different goal. Our goal is to keep the SCA alive and growing, ideally. That is what seneschals do. Anything that achieves those goals, anything that furthers those goals is a good thing. So that's how we need to frame everything. And then the last thing is we'll assume that you have gotten a good understanding of what the conflict is. And now we start to go into problem solving or root cause analysis kind of a phase. Okay, you have a problem, you have an idea, we have a conflict, whatever the scenario is. Okay, what's causing it? Am I sure that's what's causing it? What fingers, tools, dials can I turn to affect change in it for better or for the worse? And then how do I affect those dials in such a way that I get the outcome that I want? See also, how do I manipulate the situation to have an outcome that I'm looking for? And the outcome changes day to day. From the manufacturing perspective and the shop floor perspective, there have been days where my conflict resolution target was make it so that I don't kill that employee. That is my objective. That is not necessarily what the company wants. Like the company wants me to maximize output and more efficiency and all that. No, sometimes the entire goal here is me not killing you. That's it. That is the goal. So you go stand over there and you go stand over there and I don't kill anybody. And that's a good thing. And that's a win. The company isn't particularly happy about that, but cool. Sometimes my priorities of not killing people are higher than the company's priority of making money. So what are the objectives? What is the goal you're trying to actually achieve? Maybe, and this has happened, the most important goal is making Billy happy so that they'll shut up. Okay, can I do that? Can I arrange it so that at the end of the day, Billy is happy with the outcome of this conversation? Okay, can I do that in a way that still ticks all the boxes of being legal, even though I don't think it's a good idea? Yeah. What's the goal? Our goal as seneschals is legal, growing a group, keeping the group healthy. That's it. It's a very simple but not easy task. So taking your biases into account, start looking at, okay, what control, what dial can I affect that will give us an outcome that we're looking for? And all of this requires a certain amount of dancing on your feet and being quick to assess things, and that's super helpful. And sometimes there's a level of, okay, before I go have this conversation, I need to structure it in my head. I need to build this conversation so that it's going to come out the way I want it to. Hey, Con, later I'm going to want to talk to you. I've got this quick concern about your background. It's not a big deal, but I just want to chat with you about it a little bit later. Cool? So I've kind of broached the idea, and I've given him an idea. A, it's not a big idea, and B, it's got something to do with his background. Which, and I'm totally picking on you because I happen to look at your name. So, but that is a good way to kind of start things, to structure the opening of a conversation. Then you pull them aside and you say, all right, Con, I wanted to have this quick chat with you because frankly, the blurry thing doesn't work for anybody, and it hurts my eyes. So I need you to not do that going forward. Is there a particular reason that it's blurry on your end? And try to get that back and forth, but laying the points out very clearly, and have that back and forth conversation about, okay, this is what my issue or my concern is. Is there a reason that concern exists that is a valid and fair reason? How can we make that reason go away? And again, we're looking for dials that we can turn that will affect the outcome, because that's really the only important part of it. Is we want to be able to keep it legal, keep the group growing, and keep the group healthy. That's it. And sometimes one of those sliders has to go down a little bit so that you can get the other two. That's just how this works. Legal, that one really isn't, you don't have a lot of flexibility with that one. That's kind of a landmark, but the rest of it, yeah, absolutely. And even legal, there's a little bit of wiggle room depending on how loosely interpreted the law can be. And that you asked that question up the chain. You totally, don't make that call on your own. Absolutely ask for help. And because at the end of the day, seneschals are the legal representation of the group. And when you make that call, be sure that you're on ground that is defensible. And sometimes having the higher ups be able and willing to say that they will back you is an important piece of it. Maeve?
I just wanted to pause for a moment. We've got about 10 minutes left, so that if anyone's got some questions about what Cedric's been presenting, we have time to get to that instead of a quick rush with just a minute or two left. Sorry to be a little bit heavy-handed with time management.
Not at all. I was actually there. That was my last comment. So
awesome. So jump in about communication style and conflict resolution, questions, observations. Con, please.
It's building what Cedric said. I think he said it, but maybe not in so many words. But it's when you're talking to somebody or when they're talking to you, I think most of us, I certainly do, and I have to fight against it, is I start crafting my reply halfway through what they're saying, which means I've heard the first part. I'm now filling in what I'm assuming they're going to say, and I've stopped really listening. And that has gotten me in trouble before. And if you can force yourself, if you can go, oh, wait, I'm starting to craft a reply, let me stop that and listen to everything they say, make your mental notes, and then take time to reply to what they've actually said, because maybe the thing they started off with, they've now modified or changed, or they've gotten to what's really at issue in the latter half of what they're saying. And then we can respond to that. And even if the response is, okay, I think what I'm hearing is you're telling me A and B and C, is that right? And then you can, once you've got that, like Cedric said, that established mutual language going, so you're both on the same page, then you can go from there. And I think it's something we don't realize we do, and I think most people do. And once you can start to realize that, okay, I got to stop crafting my response until they say what they've said, I think we start getting better outcomes.
Yeah, That's really well stated. Thank you. Audrey?
So yeah, Cedric, at one point there was like a pie chart of what communication is, and a lot of it is the tone in which it is said, and that actually plays about, I think the percentage is 80% of the message given. It's a
Nonverbal,
ridiculously high number and higher than most people realize. For me, and in my experience, it's super important, and we're talking a lot about having a face-to-face or a voice conversation. Text is a big part of our conversation style these days because of the pandemic and because of the nature of social media. So one of the things that I stress is that if you are going to communicate, whether it's privately with somebody or you have to make an announcement to your group or to your officers, have a person in your pocket who does not read things the same way you do, and send them your draft and say, hey, read this, tell me what you understand from it, and then redraft your message if necessary. I cannot stress that enough, because when we write in text, when we make announcements, tone is completely gone. And what happens is the receiver of the message is now imprinting your message with the tone they think you are giving. And so that completely colors the message that you are trying to send. And so always have somebody or 2 or 3 people in your back pocket who can look at your message and give you constructive feedback, and trust those people to tell you the truth. Yeah, I use Maeve frequently. Like, hey, I'm gonna say this thing, does this make sense? And sometimes she comes back and says, change this, because here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm interpreting. So certainly if you're doing written communication, even if it's just going to one other person, have somebody else proof it.
And it's really important when you're doing that when you're giving it to somebody else to proof, and this is crafting the message in any way, shape, or form, don't tell that person what it is you're trying to communicate. Give it to them blind.
Yep.
And then have them tell you what they understand.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly, because you want them to come into the message blind. And Cedric, you and I have done this a couple of different times. Come into the message blind so that they are interpreting it the way John Smith, who lives 4 baronies away and doesn't know you from a hole in the wall, can understand how that person might interpret your message.
Yes, I will note in the chat, Elspeth has said she's found a particular book helpful called Crucial Conversations. Thank you for that, Elspeth. And I teach writing, so professionally. So everything about audience, about having an outside reader, about communication styles, what you think you're saying versus what your reader is hearing, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, 100%, all of that. And that was not pre-planned, but is a lovely overlap. We're coming to our last few minutes, so I want to make 2 notes and then see if there are any last questions that we can either answer now or pinpoint for a future discussion. Exchequer 101 is coming up in October. That is October 24th, also 10 to noon Eastern, led by our Kingdom Exchequer, recommended not only for exchequers, but also for seneschals, to the previous point about having a sense of what it is that exchequers do and where we as seneschals need to be informed, or at least know where we can get the information we need. And Event Steward 101 is coming up, Elspeth, that's November 14th, am I right?
Yes, and I'm going to try to get that on the calendar today.
Excellent. And, you know, again, for people who have been or want to brush up or are thinking about maybe getting into the pipeline for, right? This is to encourage broader participation and also just to remind ourselves how we do things. It's been a while and it's always useful to revisit. Are there closing questions or comments, things that we haven't touched on or things that we did, but we need to return to from this conversation? How are folks doing out there? Was this useful? Did this cover the 101 quality that you were looking for when you decided to come today? Edith, please.
It is enormously useful. I'm really, really glad you were recording because I'm probably going to have to listen to it at least 2 more times to make sure that I'm actually absorbing all of it. I'm kind of in processing overload right now. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you all for bringing your comments and your insights and also for correcting the record as needed. I appreciate that. 101 is tough because there's a lot to cover. I'm aware that I speak quickly, but we don't want to have a 4-hour session because then everybody's just on overload to, you know, we can't do that. We'll do more of these, maybe another version of this in a few more months, get a different cross section. If there's interest in Seneschal 102 or 201, right? We can talk about developing that for something more specific. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to end the recording and sign off here. And I really appreciate your participation today. Our intent is that this will be on EK YouTube. I will plaster the announcement in all of the places when that is actually posted and available. Thanks all.
Thanks, Maeve.
Thank you.